Hey guys, welcome to another Unity 5 tutorial today, and this is going to be looking at the part 6 to the C# Basics tutorial series, and we're going to be looking into activating and deactivating game objects or objects that you've got in your 3D world that you want to do something with. So in the earlier in the series, in part 2, we did something about trigger events. So when you expect to do something on a trigger event, you walk through a collider where we might walk through this little box we have here, and then we expect something to happen. So we're going to look into turning game objects on and off, because it's quite an important thing to learn, and it's not a fundamental part of C#, but it can be quite effective with any type of game that you're going to create to unhide, hide, depending if you complete an objective and you want to make something happen. So let's get straight into it. If we right click in the project panel, we'll go create and we'll go C#. And then what we'll do from here is we'll call this trigger event, and I'll call it trigger event game object just for the sake of this tutorial. Now we'll open up in whatever code editing software you've got, and you'll see we'll start off with the public class that we've got for the script that we've just created. Now I just like to keep my curly brackets below, so I have everything together, and I'll get rid of everything that's between these two curly brackets, so we'll keep it nice and organized. So first of all, if you remember, we want to create a trigger event. So I will briefly go through this, but you can look at part 2 if you feel that you want to go through trigger events more in depth. So we're going to say void on trigger enter, then open brackets, and in the two brackets we're going to write collider space other, and then below there we're going to have two curly brackets, and then in between the curly brackets we will say if other dot compare tag, then in brackets and in two quotes we're going to write whatever tag that we're looking for. So more often than not we're looking for the player tag. So if the player walks into the collision, then we will do something. Then what we can do is we can have two curly brackets below here, and then this is where we're going to write whatever we want to do to set the game object active, for instance. Now, if you want to do that, there's a few ways that you could possibly go around doing this. First way, you could add a public variable to the top of here and reference it in the inspector, or you could potentially have something which finds that object for you. But this one is possibly the quickest way to do it. Not always the best, but if you've only got a few game objects and you need this to happen, it's a good way to just manage the things that are going on. So what we'll do is we'll write public, and then whatever game object, whatever variable type should I say, so we're going to have a public game object, and then we're going to look for our object that we want to activate, so we'll just call this cube object, for instance. And then I will put a semicolon on the end. And then what we're looking for there is we're looking for a public game object, cube object. So we're going to reference that in the inspector. And then in our if statement of our trigger enter, we can say that cube object dot set active in brackets. We can put false or true depending on which way we want to do it. We can save that out, go back into Unity. I've already got a cube here, which will be my cube object. So this is the thing we expect to disappear. Now what I'll do is I'll duplicate this cube object, which is going to act as our collision. So I'll just make it bigger so we can walk through it. We'll make sure that it is trigger. We want to make sure on your first person controller you are tagged player, if not already. I just imported the old Unity 4 character, but it doesn't matter for this, but I've just made sure that I am tagged player. Now what we expect is, based on this, we will add our script to we'll just call this our trigger, and we will add the trigger event game object script to the object. Now it's going to ask for, it's not got on game object that we want, so we want to add a cube there. So we expect when we walk through this collision, the cube will just disappear. So we have our trigger in front, and there's a cube there. If we walk ahead, you'll notice that the cube just disappeared. Now you can see that if we left this available for the player to run it again, it would keep executing the code for as long as you walk through the collider. So then what you could do is you could say at the end of when you've activated the game object, that's going to just run that line once. Then we can say this dot game object dot set active is false, just like we did above. So all we're saying here is we're just saying that the game object that we're currently collided with, we'll just set it to false so we can't do anything with it again. So you'll notice that when I walk through it again, you'll notice that both items will disappear. So you'll see that both things disappeared, and in the hierarchy you'll notice that cube and trigger are both active and set to false. Now that's good in your game because you're not exactly destroying it, they still almost exist in the game world, but they're not taxing any renderer or adding any tries or vertexes or shadow problems to your game. You're just getting rid of them so they're not rendered anymore. So it's good if you want to bring them back or bring game objects back if they're already living in the scene. So it's a good way to manage things. Now that's just the simple way to actually go about doing it. You could do this in a slightly different way. We could actually do a void start, have two curly brackets below. So then what we could do is we could essentially make a private variable. So we could make private game object, and we could call this cube object 2, for instance. This is just for the sake of this. We could essentially say that cube object 2 equals game object with 2 capitals dot find object with tag. We could just use dot find and then specify the name of the item that we want, but say you've got thousands of objects in your game, it's going to be extremely slow to search it. So it's probably more beneficial to say that, okay, so cube object 2 equals game object dot find, and then we'll find the object with the specific tag that we're going to give. So we'll give the object a tag of cube, for instance, and then we will add a semicolon there. So what this will do, as soon as this code is actually run, or your game is actually executed, it will say, well, we need to find the game object with the tag cube, and we'll automatically add it to the script for you without you having to specify it in the inspector. So what we could do here is, in our script, as another example, is you could do cube object 2 dot set active, and then in brackets false with a semicolon. Now if you didn't do this right, it would throw up an error saying it can't find the actual object. But say we've got cube here, and what I'll do is I've duplicated the cube, and what I'll do is I'll call this cube 2. There you go. Now when I'm on this trigger, you'll notice that there's no public variable for us to specify. But with cube 2, we need to give it a new tag. So we could essentially give it an actual tag called, we'll add a new tag and we'll call this cube. Once we have that, we'll go back on cube 2, go to tags, go to cube, and now it's got the tag of cube. Now when we expect to play the game will have already found that cube 2 that we're actually looking for, and we expect that when we run through this collision, both cube 1, because we already gave it in the inspector for the public variable, and we expect the script to have already found cube 2 because it's based on that tag that we had given. So if we walk through, you'll notice that everything disappeared. So based on everything we have, we're just telling the script to say, right, this is the object that we've set up here, we're looking for a game object, and then we're saying find it with a tag of cube. Then when we go through the collision, we're saying that if the collision that we've detected, we've seen the players collided with our object, we'll set cube object to false, which is there, and then cube object 2 is also false, and then we're just setting the whole collider itself, or the object that the script sits on, we're just setting that to false as well. So really, There are two simple ways to either find an object to specify itself in the inspector, turn it off or on, and similarly, if you had a game object which was false and you walked across the collider, you could set it to true. So I'll give you a quick example. I've just turned cube object to true. So we expect that if I turn the cube off with this tick box at the top, I press play, you'll notice that there's no cube there anymore. Still cube 2 is alive. We expect this to turn off, cube 2 to turn off, but cube 1 to come alive again. So what we'll do is that's exactly what's happened, and we can run back through the collider and it doesn't exist because you can see down in the hierarchy what's happened. So those are simple basic ways where you can control logic in your game without really doing that much groundwork to do it, but it's important to understand this basic of just being able to pretty much just set active true or false to do certain things. So thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Cheers.